Good morning. Hey, thanks for coming out after the keynote this morning. My name is Mark Longwell. I'm with Red Hat. I'm Director of OpenStack Partner Ecosystem. I'd like to welcome you all here. We have a session being provided by Mushtaq Ahmed of Hewlett Packard Enterprise, a partner of ours in the telco and NFVI space. As you know, HPE has been a partner of Red Hat's 15 plus years across multiple technologies. As our portfolio grows, their portfolio grows, we have more solutions than anyone on go-to-market. Our latest is in the telco and NFV space. Ahmad will spend some time, Mushtaq will spend some time talking about HPE solutions, and that'll go for about 20-25 minutes, and there'll be a 10 or 15-minute Q&A at the end. So without further ado, Mushtaq Ahmed, come on board.
Thank you. You can turn that off. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Let me get my logistics here. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Red Hat, for being our sponsors today. So my name is Mushtaq Ahmed, and I'm going to go right up to who I am. Here's the agenda. As Mark said, we have an exciting session for you today. It's going to be very brief. It's going to be a little bit high level. As you know, today's theme for the summit is open infrastructure. So, hence that's right up my alley for what I do for HPE. So we will talk about that and what specifically HPE does with open infrastructure using Red Hat OpenStack. So if you remember the name of the talk, it was quite a mouthful. Even I could not remember the title of my own talk. It was basically Open HPE Telco NFV Infrastructure with Red Hat OpenStack. So you had the word NFV in there, you had the word telco in there, you had the words Red Hat and the word HPE. So we'll touch on all of those aspects. So before I get started, I'm going to go into introduction of HPE and my specific role, and then we'll quickly jump into the content. However, let's get warmed up a little bit. So how many actual Canadians do we have here who are native Canadians? Okay, I got about 5. Okay, not too many. So I think you guys are all, a little upset. Obviously, the Winnipeg Jets are out last night from the NHL playoffs, and of course, we also had the Raptors who were out. But I just wanted to tell everyone that I'm from Boston, so we got the Celtics, and we're going to take care of the Cavaliers, hopefully today or in the next few days. Yeah, the Bruins are out too, so yes, that's a good reminder. Okay, so with that out of the way, so which part of HP am I representing today? I think a lot of you folks in the room know that HP went through a transformation under Meg Whitman. We went through a rebirth almost because the company was very large. It was doing a turnaround. And at the end, what ended up happening is what you see on the slide here, is HP, the original HP, got broken up and split up into different companies. So today, we are 4 different companies. I should say they are all 4 different companies. I am particularly with Hewlett Packard Enterprise on the left. The original HP is still doing Inc. It's called HP Inc., meaning the peripherals and PCs. Of course, you've got Micro Focus, which bought HPE software, the autonomy side of things. And then at the bottom there on the right, DXC Technology is basically our HPE Enterprise business that used to do all the enterprise services, got sold over to or merged with CSC, which got created into a new company called DXC Technology. Okay, so I'm representing Hewlett Packard Enterprise today. Who am I? What do I do? As Mark said, my full role is, excuse me, I'm a worldwide product line manager. For all of you in the room who are familiar with the PLM role, you know what that entails. It's basically everything from product, support, supply chain, finance, pricing, margins, inventory, you name it, marketing, engineering, all of the above. So I actually manage the NFV telco solutions at Hewlett Packard, and Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and I actually am responsible for the Red Hat software distribution in that infrastructure. So I manage that. So we resell Red Hat OpenStack, Red Hat Ceph, and another, my colleague at HPE resells Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So, why am I here today? We're going to talk a little bit about our solutions using Red Hat Open Infrastructure also. What market is my focus? As I said, OpenStack is developed for the enterprise, as we all know, right? Does Red Hat or does OpenStack upstream have a specific stream or a release for a telco, i.e. service providers? No, not that I'm aware of, unless somebody in this room can tell me that there is. There isn't. So OpenStack is for the enterprises, right? So there's a few companies out there that will take OpenStack and actually make it will modify it, contribute to it, will harden it, and make it suitable for the telco use case. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And Red Hat helps us enable that because Red Hat has done exactly that, has actually taken upstream OpenStack, productized it so that it's usable in a telco service provider environment. And by partnering with HPE, we further take that and take it to the next level using our hardware telco experience. So we'll talk about that. Just some housekeeping, some acronyms. I don't expect everybody in this room to be telco experts or service provider experts, but I think most of you, if not all of you, should know what these acronyms mean. You're going to see these a lot in the slides. CSPs, communication service providers, basically your Verizons, your AT&Ts, your Rogers, your Teluses in Canada. Telcos, telecommunication service providers. Telcos, same thing. NEPs, you're going to hear a lot. These are your network equipment providers, so your Ericssons, your Nokias of the world that are actually buying equipment from vendors like us and providing it to the end customer, who would be the telco, right? Who would be the Verizon or AT&T. So you'll see that term a lot. CME is the vertical, meaning in that segment, what we're focusing on, which is communications, media, and entertainment. You will see some of that being used. CMS is an acronym we use at HPE. HPE has been in the telco communication service provider business for many, many years. And the group that actually led that engagement with the service providers is called CMS, Communication Media Solutions. It's mostly software focused. HPE has been focused on the telco segment, mostly on the software side. So providing the back-end software for HSS, HLR, some of your public switch telephony network, the intelligent mobile system, IMS, and a lot of that. I come from a different group, which basically uses CMS as our VNFs, and then I am from the Open Infrastructure group, so we'll talk about that. I have some contact information here for all of you. I'll put that up at the end of the presentation also. So let's jump right into the presentation. This presentation right here, if you look at it, is really talking about why are we in this business? Why is HPE partnered with Red Hat? Why are we even attempting to create open infrastructure for the telco business? Okay, and in this presentation, you will see that the 5G market or the growth, the next generation of wireless communications will drive the IP infrastructure spend, and the estimated number from various analysts and sources is about $326 billion by 2025. Okay, and that is not just NFV, OpenStack, telco, that is total IT infrastructure. So that's a pretty large number. And NFV using OpenStack for telco clouds is going to be a small percentage of that number. And by small, I mean it could be in the order of 20, 30, $40 million. Okay, and as you can see, most of the spend today is on the data center side, so the core of your network, core of the telco service providers. There is 3% at the edge. And as you saw from the keynotes, I'm assuming most of you were, or if not all of you were at the keynote this morning. And in the keynote, there was a big push for edge, okay? So that's where we think the growth is, on the edge. And we think that's where the opportunity for us is to push intelligent OpenStack deployments at the edge. And we'll talk about that a little bit. And all these other segments that you see on the slide, network operation, critical communication, mobile broadband, EV2X, which is basically your vehicle to everything, right? If those of you who don't know that acronym, so it's all your IoT stuff in your car, in your vehicles, in your trains, and anything that's mobile. That's the enhanced version of that. That's going to pick up significantly with 5G. And this is machine technology, communication, massive MTC. This is all the different medical devices, anything where machine-to-machine communication is going on that is just going to explode when 5G comes. So that's really what's driving a lot of the requirements, at least as HPE sees it. If we and Red Hat and other vendors are not on this bandwagon, you're going to miss the boat on 5G. So we'll talk a little bit about what infrastructure we're going to do with Red Hat OpenStack to help us win. Here are some of the challenges that I see and HPE sees. As you grow into 5G, you're going to start seeing that there's, on the left, you have specific applications, use cases, and on the right, you have a translation of what that challenge is. So you can see that bandwidth and performance, that's a no-brainer. You're going to have that with 5G, significant need for bandwidth, a significant need for performance. So all the hardware and that we're going to use with OpenStack has to factor that in. Okay, so we'll talk about how do we address that. Ultra-low latency is going to be required. Security is going to become a big thing, especially with all the edge use cases. Okay, reliability and high availability. That's something that we see with telcos. Everybody wants a redundant control plane. Everybody wants redundancy in the storage. If you lose your persistent data, you're in big doo-doo. Flexibility and scalability. So this is huge because if you're talking about the edge or even the data center core, the ability for you to scale on computes, so you're adding more OpenStack Nova instances on a compute blade or a compute server, that's critical. It's good to talk about it. It's good to have it on paper. But when you actually do it with OpenStack, with all the OpenStack services, it's not easy. Having worked with telcos, we know that that is a huge pain point. So the scalability and flexibility and the ability to scale up and the ability to scale out. And I don't know if a lot of you know the difference from a hardware perspective, what does scale up mean and what does scale out mean. So we'll talk a little bit about the scaling up and the scaling out, okay? Okay, so looking at our agenda, I'm going to jump very quickly now. So I'm going to move quickly because this session is supposed to end at 12:15, so I'll try to wrap up in about 10 minutes so we have some time for a Q&A. Next session is HPE and Red Hat OpenStack. So let me expand on that a little bit. Okay, so HPE and Red Hat have been working together for many, many years, as Mark said. First is initially with RHEL, so as a host operating system and as a guest operating system also. We've been working with Red Hat to resell Red Hat Enterprise Linux for many years. In fact, there's every product that HPE has today from a server portfolio has gone through or will go through RHEL certification. Okay, so basically here what you're seeing is a lot of articles where we've collaborated as two companies. So on the top there's links, and when I share a version of this slide deck, you will have these links, and perhaps in the replay also. But basically, oops, I'm gonna go back, press the wrong button there. Oh boy. Okay, so the first link at the top is a blog that I created, where I'm talking about how we are using Red Hat OpenStack and Red Hat Ceph in our hardware infrastructure. I've got some other decks here talking about our recent announcement. The second link is last week we made an announcement about Red Hat OpenShift on our hardware infrastructure, all about open infrastructure. A couple of links down here. We co-sponsored an NFV infrastructure report with SDX. We talk about Red Hat OpenStack being used over there and how we're influencing the whole direction in which NFV infrastructure is moving. So that's very good. So these are all public documents. You guys can go and read it. And then the very last one is a webinar I did with my management. Actually, my manager led it, but I was on it with the NFVI for 5G. So what is important for 5G? How do we solidify our strategy to be successful with 5G? Okay, so just wanted to talk a little bit about that. And then let's talk about the evolution of how hardware for network functions virtualization has evolved. And at least this is the journey that I took in my company with our group. And as you can see here, first, the most important thing was these NEPs, network equipment providers. They were really coming out and obviously giving the whole solution bundle, A to Z, to customers. And they would basically take Linux and actually take different variations of it. And it was pretty much under the control of the NEPs, so the Nokias, the Ericssons, the Samsungs, and all those guys. A very, very controlled, very much tight-knit, monopolized environment with NEPs. Then came along the NFV incubation phase. So when OpenStack folks started realizing that, hey, we can use OpenStack as a virtual infrastructure management software, that's when HPE started dabbling in that, and we started to say, well, let's take OpenStack, and we started with Newton, the Newton version, Red Hat OSP 10. So we started taking that and created solutions where it would actually do it would be the undercloud and the overcloud, and we'll deploy the whole compute, storage, and all the controllers. So we have some bundles on that. That was interesting, but again, we had to create it was an incubation phase, so we're creating bundles and selling it, and I'll show you some slides on that. Was it widely accepted? There was a challenge with that because everybody likes to customize. Okay, so we HPE learned that this was not the most ideal model because folks will come and say, well, we don't really want your servers, or we don't want your networking. We want everything here, except we want to tweak some things in the bottom here. So then came the NFV of today, as you can see here on the right. And what there is a sort of a disaggregation of the VNFs. Before they were all coming from the NEP. So now we're making it more open. So as you can see, the general trend on this slide, you're moving towards a more of an open environment as reality sinks in. That's the key takeaway here. So now you can use third-party VNFs, whether it's affirmed or whether it's a Cisco VNF or whether it's any other VNF that you want, Fortinet for firewall security. We're going to open up the solutions here. Then comes sort of a phase we're at right now, where we're now looking at, well, what's the next step? Yes, you can provide this customization, but then with 5G, what comes over here? And I think all of you know the answer to that. If you've gone to the keynotes, you have OpenShift might come into that play here. So containers, orchestration with Kubernetes, right? All of that. So that's the big question mark here is what's that going to look like now from an open infrastructure portfolio? So we'll talk about, that's what this presentation is about, but not just that, but it's also about some of the solutions over here that have still been successful in selling. So this is that last bucket, what is important for 5G? And as you can see here, the more critical things in the bottom here, the VNFs, of course, will come from the industry best-of-breed VNF vendors. Standards. The more important thing here, I think that's the operative word in my eyes, is standards. So if somebody's going to come up with their own proprietary protocol or 5G stack, that's not the direction. The direction is really standards, okay? And so we're going to basically conform to different standards and bring those in, whether that's for containerization or whether that's for orchestration or what have you. And then at the bottom here, we're talking about composability, disaggregation of compute in open specs, memory-centric computing, machine learning, microservices, and again, containers, DevOps, and then Redfish. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Redfish, but that is a standard, and it allows for hardware to have an open API. And so that is a big part of our strategy. So we'll talk about that as we move forward. Here's sort of how we see, HPE sees the telecommunications service provider ecosystem, and the focus right now. as you all know, is what they call, as you saw in the keynote, is the data center, right? And that's your data center right there, is your core. Now, in there, you could have the real core, and then you could have, say, the central office, or the virtual central office that would still fall under the data center or the core. And these are all the usual 4G, LTE, 5G VNFs running in the core. And then, of course, as you can see, the title of the slide is Compute Everywhere. So there's this heterogeneous architecture that's coming out that HPE is also driving, where you're going to have that same hardware that we used to push in the data center is now moving slowly to the edge, because the edge is becoming more intelligent. Okay, so that's sort of the 5G is pushing us towards this direction. So I'll talk, right now we're focused with Red Hat OpenStack, mostly in the core, but now we're moving into the edge, and I'll talk about that a little bit. Okay, so this is that last box that we were talking about 2 slides ago, right? I mean, what does that look like for 5G, right? This is what our vision is, what it's going to look like. So you're still going to have the VNFs and the best-of-breed VNF providers, you know, all certified with, and we, by the way, work very tightly with Red Hat to actually leverage their partner ecosystem. And at one point, HPE had its own partner ecosystem, but we realized that you know, it's better to kind of leverage on the Vim provider to see, because there you can leverage on their certifications with a lot of these VNF vendors. So what we're doing is actually taking all the VNF vendors that Red Hat OpenStack works with, and then you know, incorporate that into our designs. Thanks, Mark. Have a good day. So, and underneath that, as I mentioned, we have Dockers, right? We have OpenShift. Let's say OpenShift, it's OpenStack actually, but the Docker's manifestation in our design is going to be using Red Hat's implementation of that using Red Hat OpenShift, and Kubernetes for orchestration. What you also see here are things like, you know, what does open truly mean? So when we say open infrastructure, what does that really mean? You know, HP can just come out and say, well, we're open because we have open source, OpenStack on our hardware. No. You know, so when we talk to customers, when I talk to customers, I say, you know, you want an open solution. Do you just want OpenStack? No, that's just your virtual infrastructure management layer. Their customers want openness, even at a hardware platform. They don't want, you know, HPE or Cisco or Juniper coming in and selling them an appliance, and you know, you have no APIs into it. You can't control the operating system. So this is where I think the next generation of vendors like us and Red Hat are going to add a huge value add, is how do you open up those pipes into the hardware? And these are standards, industry standards. How many of you, I just want to see a show of hands, have heard of Redfish? Okay, so not too many. It's only about 4 or 5. Okay, interesting. So, you know, go and research Redfish. I mean, I have a slide on this, but basically HP was one of the original co-founders of that forum, DMTF. You know, it's basically an ability for you to create an open API into the hardware, firmware elements that are controlling your hardware, such as your CPUs or your HPE ILO, which is on our HPE servers. So that gives you that open interface. Allows you to do also aggregation of devices and controlling of all the devices that you have in your data center, okay? So that's very important. So that's on the networking side, as you can see, right there, compute. And when I say not networking, I meant compute. So any kind of servers running your VNFs, right? Your user data. So this is your telco virtual network functions. It's your telco workloads. So you know, on your phone you have caller ID, call waiting. You have think of all the features you use on your phone today, right? So from a telco perspective, all those intelligent features on your phone have a server in the data center with a huge amount of memory and huge amount of storage. So that's really what your compute is and what your storage is. So you need access to those servers. You need to get into those servers in an open way so that you can control things, right? And so that's what HP is doing. That's what other vendors are doing now in the future. You're using Redfish to open up the APIs right into, you know, the hardware. And these are multi-vendor NICs, and there's openness, right? So before, what did hardware vendors used to do? Before, hardware vendors used to push, say, an HPE NIC card. all right? Or a smart NIC would only be HPE. So we've created openness here by using other NIC cards. We created openness by creating this Redfish API. And then for storage, we're going to have another one called Swordfish that's coming out. Then we have for networking, which is basically your switches, your routers, all your networking elements in your rack that connect you into the data center spine. That's going to be opened up with this interface. So then you can actually control the switches, the routers, wireless access points, what have you, right? Anything to do with IP telephony stuff that's doing SIP or telephony, right? That all comes under networking. So let me just move on because I know we're running short on time. I'm going to skip through some of these slides. Let me skip through this. I'll just, I have one slide that kind of summarizes this a little bit. So actually, let's talk about this for a second. So HPE has its own, management infrastructure that manages software that actually manages all these different hardware platforms we have, okay? And so if you look at the HP portfolio, some of you are familiar of the ProLiant family, okay? A lot of you probably have used it, HP ProLiants. Those are under our volume business. We're very high volume shipments on that. And some of the up-and-coming, future-looking composable platforms are the Synergy. And then we bought a company called 3PAR, we bought a company called Nimble. So there's storage platforms. So it's a full portfolio. And it's not about, again, it may seem like, this is counter to what I'm saying, is we're not pushing our technology. What we're doing is we're taking all this technology and creating openness in all of them so that, we open it up so that it's a heterogeneous environment versus a homogeneous environment. So if a customer, a telco, has Cisco gear, if they have Dell hardware and they've got HPE hardware, you know what? It should be, from a telco operator perspective, should be completely collaborative work. They should be able to manage all the hardware in a similar way without having to understand HP's CLI versus Cisco CLI. So there's a lot of work in that. My next few slides will talk about that. Here are some pictures of some of the platforms, as you saw that I was telling you about. So for telco solutions, in the past, we've used these platforms here. We've used the DL ProLiants, the C7000 Blade systems. We've used storage servers and appliances. And then when we started last year, started shipping products, we were using these products right here, which are the Gen 9 servers. Again, the Blade servers, and then 3PAR storage. And then the reality is that people want SDS. Anybody know what SDS is? Software-defined storage. So, and how many of you guys over here know, which work stream is that's delivering software-defined storage for OpenStack? It's Ceph. Okay. So basically, we're using Ceph now. So Ceph is our software-defined storage, which is basically platform agnostic. You can take that software, run it on any kind of server, whether it's Dell, HPE, and so we've now realized that, and we've said, okay, well, let's give more open hardware, more composable hardware. Instead of locking you down with a HPE appliance, hey, let's give you just a server that can just run anybody's software-defined storage. And so there's openness over there because we're picking up everything from Ceph upstream via Red Hat. So we are basically selling Red Hat Ceph and Red Hat OpenStack on a lot of these solutions. And there's nothing stopping anyone from going and getting Ceph from upstream, running it on our servers too, because really what Red Hat is distributing, or for that matter, anybody who takes upstream OpenStack and Ceph, it will be the same as upstream for the most part, right? And then the future is open compute platforms. So we'll talk about that a little bit. There's some platforms coming out from HPE called Cloudline, which are, the name implies it's for the cloud. It's very open. It's following the OCP standard. I'm sure some of you have heard of OCP, Open Compute Platform. So again, creating very, very open architectures in here. So I'm just going to skip that. We talked about that. This slide basically talks about, what are the challenges? So these are the key things that customers are looking for. Heterogeneous environment, which I talked about, which is not just a mix of different hardware platforms from different vendors, but more importantly, it's a mix of different types of hardware across your topology. So it could be a rack server, you know, it could be a blade server, it could be a tower server, it could be a small single socket server versus a dual socket server. So you can imagine there's, how many servers can you think of, right? So there's going to be different ones in the different parts of your network. At the core, there'll be a different one. At the edge, there might be a different one. So heterogeneousness, rapid deployment, distributed deployment, repeatable deployment. So if you put two servers in a rack and you want to put 30, how do you do that scaling? You do 2, then you do 4, and then you do 6 if you want to add 20. In a telco environment using OpenStack, how do you repeat that success? That is critical. So the SLA that you give to your customers, your telcos. So manageability, of course. You know, what is your OpenStack management strategy? What is your hardware management strategy? And last but not least, openness, right, in everything you do. So we'll talk a little bit about that. That's hardware, right? But of course, as we all said, as you all heard in the keynotes, there's openness about open source, open software that we're talking about. I just talked about openness in the hardware. So today's presentation was a little bit more about, well, how do you have openness in all these hardware platforms, right? So in your whole layer or ecosystem, you know, you're going to have components from different vendors, merchant silicon components. So in that sense, it's open. You know, you pick and choose which one you want. You have open hardware platforms, and then you're going to have software interfaces, APIs that are open, as I said, to open it up for communication. And then you're going to have basically composable management. So, you know, we will work with telcos, so say Verizon, AT&T, Rogers, they have their own management utilities. So we're going to allow for that to happen and not force our management software, which some of you have heard of HPE OneView. I see a hand, yeah, OneView, yeah, okay. So OneView is our, just like Red Hat is our VIM, Virtual Infrastructure Management, OneView for us is our PIM, which is our PIM, Physical Infrastructure Manager, okay? So we're not gonna push our physical infrastructure management here, right? We're gonna have Red Hat as our Virtual Infrastructure Manager, but the Physical Infrastructure Manager can be anything. And now with Redfish, you know, now you've opened it up in API, so somebody can develop their own physical infrastructure management infrastructure, okay? System integrators, becoming open not just in terms of hardware, but openness in terms of, you know, is it just, before this used to be just HPE Enterprise or HPE Enterprise Services, basically saying, hey, you buy it from us, we're gonna go and deploy it. So now what we're gonna do is open up our open interfaces, our APIs to system integrators. So any of these system integrators or others in different geographies will actually come and be able to deploy and actually get the telco cloud out and install OpenStack in the way that we, HPE, have tested it, validated it, and given them the recipe to do this, okay? So this is what I was talking about here, is the openness in the platforms. So, you know, as you can see in the bullets, we have Cloudline servers that are OCP compliant. We have ProLine servers that have Redfish. And then we have virtual technologies such as Red Hat OpenStack and Red Hat containers coming. And that paints a full story of openness. These are some of our leading servers that we have that have Redfish API on it, which we run Red Hat OpenStack on. Right now, we're leading with this one for the data center, because they are dual socket usually. Most of them are dual socket architectures. You can have quad 4-socket architectures. You can have 8-socket architectures. By that I mean you can put 8 CPUs on one server. And then you have edge lines. And this is for the edge. So when you talk about OpenStack, Telco Cloud for the edge, you need something that actually has a single socket, smaller footprint. Okay? And then you have the open OCP-inspired cloud portfolio, which is much more open than both of these, and you can customize these. So I'm going to kind of skip through some of these in the interest of time, but microservices, you guys have all heard of microservices? Yeah? Okay. So in terms of how do we deploy this? What is our HPE special sauce? How do we come to the factory or help the system integrators deploy the networking, deploy everything, automate, do auto configuration of scripts and auto configuration of deployment? We use something called NPS, which is an NFV platform suite. And basically, we use microservices for that. And in those microservices, if I can just skip to this one, this is what we help do. Those microservices will help deploy infrastructure, heterogeneous infrastructure, help configure, help monitor, and help manage. Okay? So this is sort of, if you can think about it, it's a piece of software that HPE has designed using open source, open standard APIs. And we make that available when you buy infrastructure from us to help deploy the whole solution in much the same way that we can do in our factories. So I'm just going to skip through this. I think we already talked about Redfish, Swordfish, Yang for the different overcloud elements, so the compute, the storage, the networking. We talked about Redfish. We talked about open platforms. We talked about how we were taking a lead role in creating Redfish. And then we're also going to take a role in Swordfish and some of the other APIs. These are some of the open standards bodies that you guys are familiar with. Open Compute Platform, the Linux Foundation from, as you guys know, OPNFV, a lot of initiatives they do for an openness that got rolled up into the Linux Foundation. So, we're working closely with them, closely working with Acrano, closely working with artificial intelligence work streams. So all kinds of projects that we are working with in the open forum space. Okay, last but not least, what does this mean? How do we productize this? I wanted to kind of end the presentation with talking about, let me go back. Easy to deploy, you want to reduce complexity, increase competitiveness, and accelerate time to market. And we basically will take all the different elements, as you see in the bottom, the infrastructure party and the blue box, and the very bottom where it says NFV platform, which is the infrastructure, where experts are at taking the virtual infrastructure manager, the Red Hat OpenStack, and actually putting that in. As you can see here, Red Hat OpenStack is there as our Vim. We can take any of the software-defined SDN controllers and fully integrate it as a rack. So the rack you saw on the keynote on the stage, this is exactly kind of the rack that we make. And that had HP servers in it too. So you can have HP servers, HP storage, HP networking. You can have third-party hardware in the same rack with Red Hat OpenStack. And we've actually bundled the whole thing together with the latest OpenStack, the latest Ceph, and created a bundle together. And we create something called Blueprints. I don't need to define this for you guys. I think you guys all know what a blueprint is. Once you create it, it's something you can reproduce easily. So we've created these blueprints. And these blueprints basically, as you can see, are using open hardware, Red Hat, and we work with the SIs on the top, and those are some of our typical customers that are actually buying this with the Red Hat OpenStack. Okay? And you can see we partner with a huge plethora of SIs, system integrators. Here's what our rack looks like. These are all the value propositions of our blueprint. You're going to get the Red Hat OpenStack installed. You're going to have Red Hat Ceph installed. You're going to have the switches on the top. You're going to have controllers. You're going to have storage cluster with HA and redundancy. And you can see that you have this toolkit that I was talking about, the NFV platform suite, which is our special sauce on how to deploy, how to configure. That's all built in. And then we basically take hardware that is optimized for telco environments. If you've heard of NEBS compliance, DC NEBS compliance, level 3 certification, OpenStack is a piece of software that can run on hardware, but if you don't really understand the telco's requirements for NEBS compliance, which means that in the event of, and the most logical example I can give is, it needs to be hardened and tested to survive in harsh environments. And now with the edge coming, it might even get more harsh, because your data centers are less harsh. but your edge will be more harsh because it's going to have temperature issues. It might have more environmental issues affecting it, wildlife, birds, this, that, depending on where your edge solutions are sitting, because they're smaller and they're usually in less secure areas. And so for that, our hardware that we choose for this is NEBS compliant. And that's what HPE does. So Red Hat might give OpenStack, but HPE brings a value because we understand what it means to have an earthquake seismic-proof rack, or something that's going to resist an earthquake for your disks, for your SSDs, for your CPUs, for your NICs, for your switches. The cabling that we do, it's all going to be NEBS tested. Okay? So that's something that's significant that a lot of folks don't appreciate. And we deliver when we build a solution in our labs with OpenStack, these are all the deliverables that we have. We actually create a BOM. We make sure that the product we choose has a long life cycle for these telcos, because the telcos are going to deploy something and they're going to want it on for a couple of several years. So we deliver the performance reports, support maps, the quality testing reports, acceptance test plans, which we've learned for working with other telcos, performance reports on what is the throughput with using OVS DPDK with different packet sizes. We've done all the characterization, with those acceleration technologies using OpenStack, which RHEL supports. And then we do the knowledge transfer to system integrators, to customers, to help deploy the whole solution. So really, that's sort of what I wanted to end with, and that was the core that we talked about, how we bring OpenStack in the core environment. Again, this is what the rack looks like. That's the front, and that's the back, and this is in the core. This is using the HPE DL360, DL380 Gen 10 servers. As many of you know, we came out with the Gen 10s recently, and the Gen 10s have a new version of ILO. And so we're using the latest and best servers, as you can see, using Red Hat OpenStack, Ceph cluster. Ceph is 3-node cluster for the HA, and it's quite deep. We use the DL380s because they're 2U high. They have more hard disk capacity. And we're going to move to NVMe drives and SSD drives to give you that IOPS, storage IOPS that you need. So again, OpenStack, just downloading OpenStack or Red Hat OpenStack is not going to give you all that information where Red Hat has tested and tried different hardware, different drives to give you that robustness and that performance. And then now the edge, right? So we're just going to look at the edge, and here's what we're thinking for the edge. We're going to use some of our edge portfolios with Red Hat OpenStack and come up with a new blueprint for the edge, and we think this is really the future and is going to drive some of the innovation for 5G. And as you can see here, we have to look at all the hardware components, the RAM, the CPU, the storage, the NIC drives. We work with Cavium, Mellanox, Broadcom, Intel. Everybody has NICs, but those NICs have to have DPDK, OVS DPDK drivers built into RHEL. If you don't have those drivers built in, your data, NFV data, is not going to flow through from the OpenStack. OpenStack will not be able to push, and then you don't have Red Hat OpenStack working with NFV. So we, HPE, will make sure that the NIC cards are enabled and verified, certified with RHEL and with OVS, OpenStack. Okay, so that's the huge part there that I wanted to mention. So I know I'm over time, I think. I wanted to thank everybody for coming. Enjoy the show, and definitely these slides and this presentation will be available. My contact information is here, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.